everyone. Welcome back to another edition of our Winter Kids Club and our Penguin Party. So today we are taking a little bit of a break from the cold water that we've been talking about this week, and we're going on a tropical vacation to explore the waters of the coral reef. And my name is Amanda, and we have also Carrie, who is in the studio with us. Oh, are you having a hard time hearing me? There we go. We'll adjust that. And so Carrie is in the studio adjusting the images that you see behind me. And then we have Miss Talia, who's at the computer, who is going to be relaying to me any messages, observations, or questions that you might have during the program. So we invite you to participate along with us today. If you're watching this live, you can text us, and we're going to bring that number up on the screen for you in just a second. And then if you're watching this at a later time, you're welcome to email us any questions you have. So make sure, children, you have your parents' permission before you text, but that number is 562-286-1838, and we can answer your question during the program. And then if you have any other questions, you can email at live@lbaop.org. So let's go ahead and get started. I mentioned the coral reef. So I want you to imagine, what would it be like to live in a coral reef? So are you ready? Are you ready to imagine? Just close your eyes. Imagine that you are diving in a coral reef. And so here you have, if you open your eyes, you see it right in front of you. What would it be like? What do you think a coral reef habitat is like for the animals that live in it? I would love to hear the observations that you have or the thoughts that you have about this. But let's look around for some clues. What do you notice about the animals that are in here? Are there a lot of animals? Are just a few animals? What is this? So a coral reef is a habitat. There are many different types of habitats in the ocean. There can be cold, Arctic, snowy habitats like some of the ones that we've been talking about this week. There can be sandy bottom habitats. There can be tide pool habitats. There can be coral reef habitats. So what is it that makes this one different from other homes in the ocean? What are the things that you notice about it that make it unique? You can look at things that are moving, things that are not moving, and how do those things influence or affect this habitat? Well, when I mention coral, I kind of want to know, what is coral? Is coral a plant? Is it an animal? Is it a rock? Well, you probably know it is a living thing, but what is it? Is it a plant or is it an animal? That's what I'm wondering. And I think some of you already know. If you have a guess, go ahead and shout out at the screen right now. What is coral? Is it a plant or an animal? Oh, I think I hear both. Some of you are saying it looks like a plant, and it does kind of look like a plant. I'm seeing things here that look kind of like plants, like little tree branches growing up. And I also heard some of you, I think, saying animal. So if you were saying animal, I see a lot of animals in here, but how is coral an animal? Well, I'm getting some of the observations that Ms. Amador's class has been making, and they want to know, how can you tell sea plants from animals that look like plants? That's a really good question. So let's do some more examination. Let's take a closer look at another exhibit where we have some corals. And I want you to look at what makes them special. Oh, look at all those animals got really excited. It must be feeding time for them or something else. But we're going to bring up another picture and look at these corals. And I do notice that they look kind of like plants. Alexa is also talking about the temperature of the water. And you're right, Alexa, that is really key for a coral reef. It is warm. So coral reefs are habitats that live in a very warm environment. And if you think about where it's warm, there's lots of sunlight coming in through the water to get to the coral reef, which is really important. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But how do you know if something is a plant or if it's a coral? Well, we have to take a closer look at the coral to really note the difference. If you zoom in on a plant and you look at what a plant looks like, you can probably think. Go ahead and describe what a plant looks like if you were to look at it. Well, you might see leaves. They can be smooth, but sometimes they have little veins. It looks like these little lines going through them. Sometimes they have a stalk or a trunk. Maybe it has a woody covering over it. Maybe it is soft. Usually we see a lot of green in there. But let's take a closer look at coral. So I think my friend Carrie is going to be able to give us a closer view. Now we're zoomed in a little bit more on this coral. It still kind of looks like a plant, but what observations can you make about this coral? What do you see? What stands out to you? Because I say coral, but does it look like there's more than one of something in this picture? Do you see all these individual things that are sticking up? Yeah. Well, all of these individuals all are living in one big area. Do you notice that? It's like they're sharing this little living space. And every single one of these is an individual coral polyp. Have you heard that word before? A polyp. A polyp is one individual coral animal that's living around other coral animals. And together, they make the coral reef. So coral reef is an animal. Coral is an animal. And a polyp is one individual animal. You usually see corals, once they've grown big enough, with a lot of these polyps all living together. So does this one look different than the one that we saw before? And look at this one. And look at these over here. What's different about them? What kinds of things do you notice looking at this bump? Now look at this one right here. This one, it looks a little bit rounded up there. Do you see that? Whereas it looks like this one almost has some hair on its head. So what is that stuff that's sticking out like little hair? You see all that? Well, that's part of the coral polyp. And let's think of what that would be. What are some things that stick up? Can you think of any animals that might have things that stick up like this, kind of grow up, and they have these things looking like little maybe hairs on their heads? Can you think of any? I don't know if we have it readily available to us, but we might have a picture of kind of a bigger version of a polyp. It's another type of animal that's related to a coral that has a similar body shape. And oh, do you see how it looks like these little fingers are sticking up here? Well, this is not the animal I was talking about. These are clownfish, but where do clownfish live? In a sea anemone. So sea anemones are also considered polyps. So a polyp form is something that is holding on to something like a base, and it grows up from that base, and then it has tentacles that stick out along the top of it. So these are all the tentacles of the coral, or of the sea anemone in this case. And so corals are relative to sea anemones. They have tentacles too, and those are their tentacles. So sometimes the tentacles might be out and really obvious and really brightly open, and other times they might be more closed up. This one kind of looks like it's halfway in between, where the tentacles are kind of sticking out like the little tips of it, whereas this one is completely closed. And maybe if we look at that other coral polyp picture that we had up earlier, let's see if we can find some more that look a little bit more open than some of these. Now in this picture, can you find some coral polyps that are more open than others? Let me move out of the way. Do you see any that are completely closed? And I'm also noticing the colors look different. Did you notice that too? And it looks like some are taller and some are shorter, but that's just because of how open they are. So this one must be ready to eat. So just like anemones can use their tentacles to grab food and bring it into their bodies to eat, well, coral polyps can do the same thing. So they can also feed on stuff that's floating around in the ocean around them. And there's something else, though, that they have that helps them eat, too. But maybe the more hungry one is, the more it sticks out to try to grab food. And then these are ones that maybe aren't as hungry. So you can still kind of see their tentacles, but they haven't stuck them out quite as far as this one. And their bodies aren't standing up as tall and far away as the ones that are eating either. But now I want to show you over on my document camera a close-up view of some coral. Get this out of the way. And this is super bright, so I'm going to turn my lighting down. Now let's see if we can take a closer view. Let's see if it'll adjust. There we go. Okay, now I said this was coral, but what do you notice that's different about this picture compared to what we were just looking at, those other pictures? Is there anything that you notice that is the same? Is there anything you notice looking at this picture that would indicate that it might be the same type of animal that we saw before? What do you notice? I don't see anything sticking up looking like tentacles on this one. Do you see any evidence of where maybe there was a polyp? Do you think this is a polyp right now? Does it look like it's moving? No, this is not a close-up of one polyp, but there is evidence of where polyps used to live on this. So this right here is no longer a living coral, but when the coral dies, this is what's left behind. So this is what's giving the coral reef its structure and its shape. There are different kinds of corals. Some are called hard corals, and those are the ones that build the reefs, and some are soft corals that don't have that same sort of skeleton underneath them like this one has. But now as you look at this, knowing that this is the remnants or the inside leftover skeleton of our coral, can you tell where there might have been individual coral polyps living? Do you notice these little tiny holes? Each one of those holes is where one coral polyp used to live. So when this animal was alive, or this community of animals, the coral reef, it had probably thousands of coral polyps all over it in all sorts of bright, beautiful colors. Did you also notice the color is different here? Well, why do you think the corals when they're alive are so much brighter than the corals that aren't alive, like this one? Well, that takes looking inside the coral to get a better understanding. And while we don't have any picture inside the coral right now, we need to think about what lives in their tissues. Now, we know that plants, we were talking about plants being green, and sometimes what they're doing is taking energy from the sunlight, and they are turning it into food and oxygen. Well, that same type of thing can happen inside a coral. Even though coral is an animal itself, it also has something called, are you ready for this? It's called zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae is an algae that lives inside of the coral. And it takes energy from the sun and it produces food and also color for the coral. So remember how we said those coral polyps were grabbing food with their tentacles? Well, inside the coral, inside their tissue, they are also producing food and they're also giving them color. Now, in addition to this zooxanthellae that is inside the coral, we also have pigment. So just like we have pigment in our skin that might make our skin different colors, or our hair might be different colors, well, corals also can have different pigments that acts as a sunscreen for them. Isn't that neat? So our skin, we need to protect from the sun. Some skin has a little bit more protection in it than others. I happen to be pretty fair-skinned, and I need to make sure I have sunscreen on so I don't get burned when I go out. But corals have a built-in sunscreen with some of the pigmentation that they have, but that's what gives them their beautiful color. But if you see a coral that looks like this, that means they don't have their zooxanthellae anymore. They're not alive producing food. And this is something that can happen when the water gets too warm or the conditions aren't right for the coral to grow. And this is no longer alive, but we can learn a lot from it by taking a close view. Now, Aiden wants to know, how many species of corals are there? Aiden, there are so many different kinds. Fortunately, my friend Taya wrote for me the answer. There are 6,000 species, so probably even more than 6,000 species. But 6,000 is a big number. And I'm just kind of curious, how many do you think you see in this exhibit? Now, how can you tell if you're looking at the same type of coral or a different one? Well, if you look around, we said corals are made up of a lot of different polyps. Do you think you can find the polyps on this coral? Yeah? Well, is this the same one as this one? Well, these are definitely the same species. They're the same color and they have the same shape. Do you notice how the structure is all kind of, well, they kind of look like big bumps or like little fingers, like little digits sticking up. And they're covered with all these polyps. So this is one type of coral species. But if you look over, at a different one, actually, I think we have an animal there. Like this one. Oh, here's a good example, like right up here. Do you see how it's kind of, well, looks a little different shape? It looks a little bit maybe flatter. Is it more flat? Yeah, so some corals are kind of flat or like the flower petals. Kind of like does it kind of look, if you use your imagination, like that could be petals from a flower? Well, some corals are shaped more like flowers or foliate. Then you have some that are branching that look like they are, oh, here's also some other coral here that looks kind of flat. Some coral can grow flat like a table, which we call table coral. So there are different kinds. So even though it looks very different than this one here, this is another type of coral, another type of hard coral that helps build the reefs. So it's kind of fun to look around. Oh, here's some branching coral, I guess, right up here. They look a little bit more like little tree branches or antlers that are kind of coming out. So different types of corals and different shapes. Brittany wants to know, are coral reefs endangered? Brittany, I'm so glad you asked that question because yes, coral reefs are endangered. And one of the things that is really hurting the coral reefs is a change in ocean temperature. And that can happen when the sunlight is coming into the water and it's not being reflected back. There's more carbon dioxide in the water or in the atmosphere that the water is absorbing. And as it's absorbing that, it's also, the temperature is starting to rise as it's getting more rays from the sun, as some of our ice is melting. It's a big, complicated thing. And so what's happening is as the water temperatures are warming, there's also something happening called ocean acidification that is causing just the balance of things in the water to be a little bit off for our corals so that they don't do so well. And then what happens is they end up losing some of these zooxanthellae living inside of them, giving them their color and their food. And when they let those go into the water, well, then the corals aren't really able to survive. So corals are very picky with the temperature of the water and the conditions of the water. Sunscreens, even though they can be important for us, there can be some kind that you might want to try to avoid because some can be more harmful to the ocean than others. But it is important that we stay healthy and wear our sunscreen. So we understand that you can't always choose the best, we can do whatever we can to help the environment, but we're not in any way telling people not to wear sunscreen when they go out to the ocean. But it's a good thing to think about. What kinds of things are better for you or better for the ocean and the products that we're using? And then Brittany says, are the corals at the Aquarium of the Pacific alive? That's another good question. In this exhibit, we do have some live corals. In other exhibits, we have artificial coral. And one of the reasons for that is because as corals grow, it can take a really long time for them to grow. And they need a lot of really just perfect conditions for them. And if we were to go out to the ocean and try to collect coral that is so slow growing, like if you were to look at this exhibit here, our tropical reef exhibit, which is our largest one here, if we were to take out this much coral from the actual ocean, that would really harm the ocean habitat because look at all of the homes that we would be taking care of or that we would be taking away from all of the fish that call the coral reef home. And this would represent hundreds of years of growth because for some coral species, they can be very, very slow growing. It could take them an entire year to grow even an inch. And so this would not be something we would want to remove from the natural environment. So when we started the aquarium, we only had one exhibit that had any live coral in it. And we called it our live coral exhibit. But over time, we've been able to grow some of our own coral here at the aquarium, and we've been able to use it in some of our exhibits, which is very exciting. We've also been a part of helping grow coral in other areas, but you can learn more about that in our next program on coral reef conservation. But Santiago wants to know how many colors of corals are there? Well, let's take a look. What colors do you guys notice? What do you see as you look around? Do you see different colors? Well, I definitely see some yellow, some green, some purple. This one looks kind of orange over here. And maybe those colors that we were looking at earlier, if you remember some of those colors can be very different, very vibrant, all sorts of different colors of coral. And there are some that even live deep down in the deep, dark parts of the ocean that have the ability to even glow. They seem to be glowing corals, which are beautiful. We have an exhibit here that features some of this glowing coral. And you can check it out in our virtual tours. If you ever wanted to see a virtual tour of our tropical Pacific Gallery and see what exhibits we have there that we don't have webcams in, you can learn more about that on our website. Okay, so great questions, everyone. Now, as we're looking at the coral reef, we've learned about what it is. It's a habitat that's created by living organisms, living animals called corals made up of polyps. And there's two kinds. There's hard corals that build the reef, and then there's the soft corals, and you might even be able to see some that might be soft corals here. Do you see anything moving around in here that doesn't look so hard? Yes, you might notice as the water is flowing, some look a little bit more wavier and flowier than other kinds of corals. And so there are some called fan corals, and then we have these corals that are a little bit softer here. But now, who lives in the coral reef? What animals do you notice living in the corals? Well, I see a lot of things that seem to be darting about in and out. Did you notice those too? Now, are they all the same size? Are they all the same color? Are they all the same shape? You probably have noticed that no, they're not, especially when we go back to our big exhibit. Or we can even take a look at our coral reef predators exhibit too, but there's so many variety in this one right here. Oh, I see a shark back there. So there can be some bigger animals. Do you see any other big animals living in the coral reef? What animals do you notice in our coral reef? Well, I see some that look pretty big right now, and they have a very different shape than the other ones. What animals do you notice? What differences in shapes do you see? Well, I notice a lot of fish like this one. They seem to be kind of wide when you look at them on the side, but when they turn their body, they look a little bit skinny, kind of like they've been pressed like this. This is what we call compressed. So a compressed body shape, like you're clapping your hands together. And as they swim through the coral reef, do you think having a skinny shape like this could help them? In what way could having a skinny shape up and down like this help them as they're swimming around the coral reef? How would you describe what the coral reef looks like? Now, the coral reefs are made of lots of different kinds of species. Remember how we said the different species of corals have different kinds of shapes? Some are branching, some kind of stick up like this, like little fingers, some are kind of flat. And so you might refer to this as a coral wall. But when we think of a wall, we usually think of a flat surface. Does this look like a solid flat surface? Of course not. It looks very, very different. There's lots of little nooks and crannies and different shapes that provide great hiding places for all of these fish. And if you have a skinny shape like this, do you think it might be easier for you to sneak in between all those places? Absolutely. But then there's also some fish in here that are flat, but they are flat like this. Did you happen to notice them? Let's see if we can find any right now. I see one, but this one is camouflaging. You have to look very, very carefully. But if you look down, oh, there's one who's not camouflaging. Do you see this one right here with all the spots on its body? This is an eagle ray. So this is one of our stingrays here at the aquarium, and I think they're beautiful. They have long, beautiful tails and spots on their bodies. So it has a depressed body shape where it's flattened out like a pancake. But I want you to notice, look again really carefully. Do you see another animal that looks like a pancake that's just sitting somewhere? Well, we've noticed one of our animals at the aquarium, our southern stingray, likes to sit on a certain type of one of our artificial corals. That's like a table coral. Remember how we said some are kind of flat? So this table coral kind of grows like this, and it provides a nice flat place for this particular ray to sit on. Do you see it? Well, our eagle ray is swimming over by it right now, but it's right there. So what you're looking at here is actually a stingray sitting on top of some flat coral. And right up here, that little dark area would be the spiracles, the opening right behind their eyes. And their eyes are right in front of it, right here. So that is a southern stingray sitting on top of the coral in the coral reef. So yes, even a flat-shaped animal can be happy living here. And I think it's really fascinating to look at all the different colors. Why do you think it'd be good for a coral reef fish to have bright colors? Do you think that helps them at all living in the coral reef habitat? Do you notice any fish with bright colors here? Let me step out of the way again. because there are so many different kinds. Are there any that look particularly interesting to you? I love looking at the ones that I notice the most are the ones with the yellow color in them. There are a lot of animals in the tropical reef that have yellow color to them. Do you see any? Here's one right here. That's called a yellow tang or a yellow surgeonfish. There's also some right here that has a yellow tail and yellow fins. So the rest of its body isn't yellow, but it does have some yellow coloration. You may have also seen one up down here that has a yellow tail, and that is a pallet surgeonfish or a pallet tang. Sometimes they're also called regal blue tangs, so depending on what common name you want to give them. But they are really neat fish. Now, one thing that these fish, that all yellow fish here, and this fish right here, you might also know as the dory fish. So the pallet tang and the yellow tang are both types of surgeonfish. Have you ever heard that word before? Well, a surgeon, do you know what a surgeon is? A surgeon is a special kind of doctor who does operations and surgeries on people. Well, they don't do any operations, but if you are a surgeon, you need to be able to cut into things. Well, that's what these fish have. They have a little spine or like a scalpel at the base of their tail. And that's how you can identify a fish as being a member of the surgeonfish family. And we'll see if we can find any other ones. In fact, the one that swam by with that big horn on its head, called a unicorn surgeonfish. Oh, and yes, and someone's mentioning how those bright colors help them to camouflage. You're absolutely right. And sometimes that yellow helps camouflage their little spines so they don't look so dangerous either. But if you ever go to maybe a doctor's office, a dentist office, a restaurant, or some place that has an aquarium, a tropical aquarium, it's very common to see some of these fish here. But look at the base of their tail, right where their tail comes together with the rest of their body. Look for something that sticks out. So even this one, unfortunately, we're not getting a really good view from our particular camera of our webcam of those little spines that stick out, but they are there. So look really carefully next time you get the opportunity. Well, before we go, I want to tell you about our activity that we have on our website for Winter Kids Club that will allow you to make your own coral reef habitat. So I have right here with me a coral reef diorama that I made. And so what you can do is find the instructions on how to make your own, or I'm sorry, did I say diorama? I meant to say triorama because it's got 3 sides to this. So you can find the instructions to make this on our website in the attachment. And we would love to see the pictures of the trioramas that you make. And you can tag them with hashtag AOP Kids Club. Or is that right? Did I say that right? Let me make sure. Yes, AOP Kids Club. That is right. Hashtag AOP Kids Club. And what I did is I drew different types of corals. And you can make things stand up on the bottom. You can color in on the backside. You can even make things hang down or use tape like I did for a turtle. Because there are so many different kinds of animals that live in the coral reef. Some in between, some in the small spaces, and some of the bigger ones maybe swimming around the outside. Maybe you even want to draw or make a little stingray that's sitting on the bottom. So it's up to you. You can make your coral reef triorama however you'd like, but we would love to see what you've made. And so please share it with us. You can also text us those pictures as well. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today. And we hope that you continue to join us for more Kids Club programs and our Aquarium Online Academy. We hope to see you here one day at the Aquarium of the Pacific when our doors are open. But thanks for joining us today and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.